People often make the mistake of believing that their current reality is the full measure of who they are. They look around at their environment, their relationships, their financial condition, their health, their failures, and they assume that what they see is the truth, unchangeable and permanent. But that's not the truth. It's only a snapshot, a still frame from a much larger film. It is a reflection, not a destiny. And the more you convince yourself that your present reality is immovable, the more you build the walls of the prison that keeps you there. Think about it this way: your present circumstances are not a verdict on your life. They are merely the residue of your past choices, your past beliefs, and the limitations you accepted without question. What you see around you right now is the echo of who you used to be. If you treat that echo as though it is unshakable reality, you chain yourself to a life that could have been left behind. You cannot escape a prison that you worship as truth. The great danger of life is that people mistake the temporary for the eternal. They forget that human beings are the only creatures who can deliberately imagine a future that doesn't exist and then set about making it real. A tree cannot choose to stop growing where it was planted, but you can. A lion cannot reinvent its nature, but you can. You can decide that the person who wakes up tomorrow will not live in the shadow of yesterday's mistakes. Yet this possibility is destroyed the moment you say, "This is just the way things are." Now, ignoring your present reality doesn't mean living in delusion. It doesn't mean pretending that your bills don't exist or that your failures never happened. It means refusing to let those things define the horizon of your life. It means understanding that while they are real, they are not final. The most dangerous form of despair is not in the magnitude of suffering, but in the belief that suffering will always remain. That's what locks people in mediocrity and self-destruction, not the difficulty of the moment, but the conviction that the moment will never change. You have to see your current reality for what it truly is. A story you've been telling yourself for years, reinforced by habits you didn't even notice you were practicing. And here's the truth: stories can be rewritten. You can pick up the pen, you can cross out the paragraphs that no longer serve you, and you can draft a different ending. But you will never do that if you keep bowing down to the supposed permanence of what surrounds you right now. Look at anyone who has dramatically transformed their life. The addict who becomes a healer, the broken individual who builds wealth and stability, the person drowning in anxiety who grows into a leader others rely on. None of these transformations begin with a worship of present circumstances. They begin with an act of defiance. They begin with the radical decision to say, "This reality is not who I am. It may be where I stand, but it is not where I must remain." That's the essence of freedom. To realize that you are not defined by the snapshot, but by the possibilities that you're willing to pursue. And here's something most people never understand: the longer you stare at your current reality as if it is fixed, the stronger it becomes. Attention feeds reality. If all you ever do is focus on the weight of your failures, they'll grow heavier. If you obsess over the scarcity around you, you'll find less and less abundance. But if you shift your gaze, even slightly, toward what could be, toward the faint but undeniable whisper of potential, you begin to starve your current prison of its power. So the real question is not whether you can change your reality, but whether you can refuse to let your current circumstances hypnotize you into believing that you cannot. The chains that bind most people are not forged from steel. They are forged from perception. They are shackled by beliefs like, "This is all I'll ever be," or "I can't escape this." Break those beliefs, and the world begins to expand. You are not sentenced to live in the echo of your past. You are not trapped in the photograph of today. You are an unfinished story, and the only way to honor that truth is to ignore the false permanence of the present. Step beyond it. Dare to imagine a life bigger than what you see right now. Because the moment you stop bowing to your current reality, you begin to create a new one. And so I'll leave you with this. Don't confuse the walls around you for the limits of your life. They're only the reflection of yesterday. Your future does not belong to your circumstances. It belongs to your courage. If you want to change your life, you have to begin with a rebellion. Not the kind of rebellion that throws rocks at governments or tears down institutions, but a rebellion against your own mind, against the voice that tells you that you are bound by your past, that you are trapped in your current conditions, that you must accept what has already been written. That voice has been whispering for so long that you've mistaken it for truth. But it isn't truth, it's a habit. And like any habit, it can be broken. The human mind is a master storyteller. It invents explanations for why things are the way they are, and then it repeats those explanations until they feel like law. You've heard them. This is just who I am. I'm not good at that. I've always failed. People like me don't succeed. Each of those phrases is a psychological chain, a script running quietly in the background, ensuring that you never step outside the prison of familiarity. The tragedy is that most people never realize they're obeying these scripts. They confuse the story with reality, and so they live small, predictable lives. To rebel, you have to interrupt the story. You have to catch yourself in the act of repeating those self-definitions and declare war on them. This doesn't mean you lie to yourself. It means you stop treating every internal voice as sacred. You realize that much of what you've been calling truth is simply the echo of fear, failure, or conditioning. And if you want to create a life you've never had, you must first ignore the authority of that echo. It's not easy because the brain is addicted to familiarity. Even misery can become comfortable if you've lived in it long enough. People stay in toxic relationships, in jobs they hate, in destructive habits, not because they love the suffering, but because the suffering is familiar. The known, no matter how painful, feels safer than the unknown. So when you begin to reball, when you start to ignore the mind's insistence that this is just how life is, you are engaging in a radical act of courage. You are stepping into the wilderness of possibility where the rules haven't been written yet. And here's the paradox. Ignoring your present reality in this way is not a form of denial, it's a form of deeper truth. Because the truth is not what you see right now, the truth is what you are capable of becoming. To focus only on your current circumstances is to accept a distorted, incomplete picture of yourself. You are potential, not just history. You are becoming, not just being. And if you don't rebel against the gravitational pull of the present moment, you'll never discover that deeper truth. The great thinkers and leaders throughout history have all shared this quality of psychological rebellion. They refused to let the apparent limitations of their era define what was possible. They ignored the jeers, the statistics, the so-called common sense. They walked away from the scripts handed to them by their families, their cultures, or their own minds. And because of that, they created realities that once looked impossible. That is not reserved for geniuses or prophets. That is available to you if you're willing to confront and disobey the tyranny of your own self-limiting thoughts. So, how do you practice this rebellion? You begin small. You notice when you say, I can't, and you challenge it. You notice when you assume failure before even starting, and you act anyway. You notice when your mind paints your future with the same colors as your past, and you refuse to accept the picture. That moment of refusal, repeated again and again, is the seed of transformation. It will feel uncomfortable. It will feel like betrayal. And in a way, it is betrayal, a betrayal of the old self, the one who chained you to the same old story. But that's the cost of freedom. To step into a new identity, you must be willing to leave the old one behind, even if it screams at you to stay. This is the essence of creating a new life. The rebellion comes first, the freedom comes later. You don't wait for your mind to feel ready, you confront it. You don't negotiate with the limiting stories, you disobey them. And in doing so, you send a message, not just to your brain, but to reality itself, that you are no longer willing to bow to what is, because you are already committed to what could be. And so I'll say this, the most dangerous thing you can do is obey every thought that enters your head. The most liberating thing you can do is rebel against the ones that keep you small. If you dare to disobey your old story, you will discover a new one waiting to be written. Once you've learned to stop bowing down to your present circumstances and you've begun to rebel against the false authority of your own self-limiting thoughts, something extraordinary becomes possible. You begin to imagine. And imagination is not a childish distraction. It is the foundation of transformation. Every great shift in human history, every personal reinvention, every act of becoming begins first in the mind, long before it takes shape in the physical world. We underestimate imagination because it feels intangible. We think of it as daydreaming, as something secondary to real life, but imagination is the workshop of reality. Everything you see in the modern world, this microphone, the chair you're sitting on, the skyscrapers that pierce the sky, was once nothing but an idea in someone's head. It was invisible until someone had the audacity to treat imagination not as fantasy but as blueprint. And your own life works in exactly the same way. If you dare to imagine yourself differently, if you allow yourself to see with clarity the person you could become, your mind begins to reorganize everything around that vision. Your choices shift, your behaviors adapt, your priorities reorient themselves. The image of the future self becomes a kind of magnetic force pulling you forward. But without that vision, you remain directionless, trapped in cycles of repetition. People who cannot imagine a new life for themselves inevitably relive the old one. Now, this is not the kind of imagination that drifts without discipline. It is not the kind of fantasizing where you hope for change but continue to live in the exact same way. No, this kind of imagination is demanding. It requires precision. You must craft an image of who you could become in such detail that it begins to feel more real than the life you're currently living. That is what activates the deeper structures of the mind. That is what awakens the subconscious to reorganize your energy toward that end. Psychologists have long understood that the brain does not perfectly distinguish between vivid imagination and lived experience. When you imagine with intensity, your brain lights up as if you are already living it. Athletes rehearse victories in their minds before they step onto the field. Musicians hear the music in their head before their fingers touch the instrument. And ordinary people, you, me, anyone, can rehearse a new identity so deeply in imagination that the body and mind begin to act as though it is already true. That is how change becomes possible. But here is the danger. Most people use this same power of imagination against themselves. They rehearse failure, they envision embarrassment, they predict rejection. And by doing so, they train their minds to deliver exactly the reality they fear. That is why you must become ruthless with your imagination. You must seize it, discipline it, and direct it toward the highest vision of who you could be, rather than letting it serve as the architect of your self-destruction. And understand this. Imagination is not a substitute for work. It is not enough to see it in your mind. You must live as though that imagined life is already unfolding. You must speak in alignment with it, act in alignment with it, and persist through the friction that arises when your current reality resists the new blueprint. That friction is not a sign you're failing. It's proof you're crossing the threshold between who you were and who you're becoming. What you repeatedly imagine becomes the silent architecture of your destiny. If you choose to see yourself as a failure, then every action will bend toward confirming that picture. If you dare to imagine yourself as disciplined, capable, and purposeful, then each small decision begins to reinforce that identity. The mind follows the image. Life follows the mind. This is why you cannot afford to drift in thought. You must imagine deliberately. You must treat your inner vision as a kind of sacred script that you're committed to enacting. Because whether you realize it or not, you are always imagining something. Either the decay of your potential or the unfolding of it. And whichever picture you hold long enough, with enough clarity and conviction, will eventually harden into reality. So I'll leave you with this: your imagination is not a toy. It is the blueprint of becoming. Guard it. Discipline it. Use it to carve out a vision that pulls you into a life far greater than the one you see now. Because the future doesn't begin when the circumstances change. It begins the moment you dare to imagine differently. There's a dangerous lie buried deep in modern culture, and it's this: that you must wait until you feel ready before you act, that you should align your behavior with your emotions, and that if you don't feel motivated, inspired, or confident, then somehow the timing isn't right. That lie has trapped more lives in mediocrity than failure ever has, because the truth is brutally simple. You will almost never feel ready, and if you wait for the feeling to come, you will waste your life standing at the threshold of your potential, watching opportunities pass you by. The people who transform their lives, the ones who build realities that once looked impossible, are not those who feel the most confident or motivated. They are the ones who act in spite of their feelings. They understand something most people never grasp: feelings are fickle, unreliable, and constantly shifting. If you treat them as the compass of your life, you'll wander endlessly in circles. But if you anchor your actions to a vision, to a decision, to a commitment, then your feelings begin to fall in line. The emotions follow the action, not the other way around. Think about it. You don't wait until you feel strong before you lift weights. You lift weights, and then you feel strong. You don't wait until you feel courageous before you step into the unknown. You step, and then courage emerges as a byproduct. You don't wait until you feel disciplined to begin new habits. You begin them, and through repetition you become disciplined. The sequence matters. Action precedes emotion. Waiting for your feelings to align before you act is like waiting for the fire to warm you before you strike the match. And yet, how many people are paralyzed because they keep waiting for motivation? They say, "I'll start when I feel ready. I'll change when I'm inspired. I'll pursue my dream when the time feels right." But the time will never feel right because the conditions of life are always messy and the emotions of human beings are always unstable. If you make decisions based only on the unstable waves of emotion, you will never reach the shore. This is why faith in yourself, in your vision, in the possibility of a future not yet seen, is so essential. Because faith allows you to act without immediate proof. It allows you to behave as though the reality you imagined in your mind is already unfolding, even when your circumstances scream the opposite. And every time you do this, you reinforce the new identity you're building. You prove to yourself, not through theory but through action, that you are no longer the prisoner of how you happen to feel in the moment. There's a deeper psychological truth here as well. When you act in alignment with your higher vision, even when your emotions resist, you train your nervous system to serve your future instead of your past. You interrupt the old loops of procrastination, doubt, and fear. You teach your body and your mind that the hierarchy of command has shifted. Your purpose now leads, not your moods. Over time, this reprogramming changes everything. Your emotions stop dictating the terms of your life, and instead, they begin to support the structure you've built through disciplined action. Of course, it won't feel natural at first. It will feel like friction, like forcing yourself to walk through fire. That's because you're tearing yourself away from a lifetime of conditioning that told you to obey your feelings. But discomfort is not a sign you're on the wrong path. It's the evidence you're rewriting your story. The discomfort means you're breaking through the gravitational pull of the old self. And if you can endure that discomfort long enough, you emerge on the other side as someone who acts not out of fleeting moods, but out of chosen values. And that's when your reality begins to bend. Not because you wished it into existence, not because you waited until you felt different, but because you acted as though your new life already belonged to you. In the long run, reality does not bow to feelings, it bows to disciplined persistence. That's the law you must live by if you want to step beyond the limits of who you've been. So, don't wait. Don't sit around waiting for permission from your emotions. If you want to create a new reality, you must behave in accordance with it now, before you feel it, before you see it, before you believe it. Because the act of behaving as though it were true is what makes it true. And so here is the challenge: stop waiting to feel ready. Stop waiting for confidence, for motivation, for certainty. Begin now. Act as though the life you want is already yours, and watch as your reality catches up with your courage. So in the end, your present circumstances are not your destiny, they're only the residue of your past. You are not bound by the voices in your head that tell you this is all you'll ever be. You are not condemned to rehearse the same story until the day you die. You are imagination in motion, potential waiting to be claimed. And the only way to honor that truth is to step beyond what you feel, to act as though the life you've envisioned is already yours. Don't wait for the world to change before you begin. Don't wait for your emotions to line up perfectly before you take a step. Begin now. Live as if you already are the person you've imagined. Build the new reality with every word, every habit, every choice. And soon, what was once only a vision in your mind will rise around you as the undeniable truth of your life. Because in the end, reality does not define you, you define reality.